Megan, you mentioned that the glial cells can be affected or unaffected. Do you remember that slide where you had the two images there? And then you said what genes are being affected. What do the genes actually have to do with the glial cells being affected?
So I think this is part of the great mystery is we don't know. We don't know. So there's a lot of emphasis placed on what genes are being expressed in motor neurons, but what about the other cells? And I think this is not only with motor neuron disease, with a lot of other conditions where it appears very obvious what cell's affected. Where the cell lives in the body has a huge effect on the disease, and I think that's the next. So this niche that we often we talk about, where the cell lives in the body is affected. So the glial cells provide part of that niche. So what genes are they being expressed? So in all of our cells in the body, our body, we have a nucleus, with the exception of red blood cells that loses its nucleus. But in our nuclei, we have our DNA, and we have the same DNA in all of those cells. What's different between what makes a neuron different to a glial cell is what genes are being expressed from that DNA, that profile. And that changes depending on the disease, but also depending on the cell type. There's a question here. I'm sorry, I didn't repeat your question, but I hope the people listening, I'll do that for the next one, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask you, I remember a number of months there was something on the news about new DNA, I can't remember what the term of it was, but new DNA strains being identified within our DNAs, which gave a whole new level of research. Like, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think so. So the questions around, I suppose, manipulating our DNA and understanding more about our DNA, and that's again something that's really taking off has really taken off over the last couple of decades.
I thought it was a whole new, like we have A, B, C, D, but within that A, B, C, D, there's a whole new level of sequences.
So what I'm thinking about in terms of media, particularly media coverage, is if you imagine the DNA as a big chain, that we long recognised certain regions of the DNA that encode for a gene. So genes make proteins, right? And proteins are signals and tell the cell what to do. So there were these discrete regions in the DNA that were made genes. And then there was stuff between it that was called junk DNA. We now know that there's some stuff in junk DNA that's really valuable. No longer junk.
Okay, so it's not junk.
It actually might.
Done something.
Yeah, the junk actually might be, the powerhouse in that. What's defined within the junk might be ways to amplify or down-regulate the gene expression.
Yeah.
So with someone who has, identical twins, for example. Identical twins, I'm sure you know an identical twin, and they are not the same. Even though they have identical DNA, the way their personality, the way they look, the way their hair sits is different. It's probably what we call epigenetics in that valuable bit of stuff that's in between the genes.
Okay.
Another question.
Peter Feldman in the United States was doing trials with stem cells. Do you know anything that's come of that, or anything that's come out of that?
No, I'm sorry. So that was Eva Feldman. Do you know anything about that, Gina? No, I don't. All I know, I was reading a review recently, and there was several strategies that are being looked at. So one is mesenchymal stem cell based, and one is neural stem cell. There's also some genetic modification with the neural stem cells where they get them to overexpress those sort of factors that help nerves. So I'm not quite sure where that work would fit in a clinical research.
I last asked the experts. I somehow got the name from, somewhere along the line. I thought it might have been.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that study.
Sorry.
That's okay. I could probably try to help you find out more after, though, if you like. Another question down here?
Have you heard about the clinic in Russia that does the stem cell?
Yeah, so this is a clinic in Russia, and I think I'm really glad you raised it because I don't know if anybody watched the 60 Minutes story. Yeah.
The reason I raised it,
Yes.
sorry, is because a lady I work with, her daughter has just come back from Russia after having stem cell treatment. She has MS.
So this is a clinic in Russia that has gained a lot of prominence in the Australian media, and it poses a really interesting and slightly different aspect of stem cell science. So if we can go back a step, remember I talked about multiple sclerosis before, MS, and that it's the oligodendrocytes that are affected? It's the what happens to the oligodendrocytes is they are attacked by the body's immune system, okay? And this is a disease that oscillates in terms of how it presents, so it goes up and down. I think we'll find in time that it's a condition that's called MS as an umbrella term, but there's often lots of different manifestations of it. And I think they're probably discretely recognised conditions once we understand more about it. However, what is true is that at the start of someone's journey with MS, their immune system is under attack. Their immune system attacks their oligodendrocytes. Their oligodendrocytes are under attack. And one thing we know, and colleagues of mine at Melbourne Uni actually did a clinical trial on this over 10 years ago, is that we know we can crudely manipulate the immune system. If we give a patient chemotherapy, it kills off all their blood stem cells that make white blood cells that are attacking the brain. So it's a really crude way of stopping it. So the Russia clinic, that's the approach they use. They say if a patient has MS, we can take their bone marrow, we can then give them chemotherapy and their own bone marrow back, and we will reset their immune system. Now, while this might be true, if again we look at the risks, chemotherapy is crude and it also can kill you. And it kills you because it basically wipes out all of those red blood cells, white blood cells and platelets. Now, what my neurologist colleagues tell me is that there are new and better ways to manipulate the immune system. And that's the next generation of drugs that the MS patients are now given. So whilst they would prefer, and it's less risky, so it's more discreet, and so that's their first choice in terms of treatment now, that they give new patients who are in that really immunoreactive phase, the start of their MS, they treat them with different types of drugs. If those approaches then fail, they will then contemplate chemotherapy. Okay? So that's what I think is the reality. What's happening though is that clinics in Russia, in China, in India are saying, well, we'll take any MS patients. So they piggyback that strategy that's only appropriate for a discrete set of patients and apply it to everybody. And of course, it's very expensive. So for some patients, it will work, it might work, but if you're further down your MS journey and your oligodendrocytes are already damaged, this won't grow new ones. So I think, and so if anyone's interested, the Multiple Sclerosis Research Australia website has a fantastic resource on this. It's called, as we love our acronyms, AHSCT, so autologous hematopoietic stem cell treatments. Not applicable for MS, for motor neuron disease, completely different strategy, but that's the basis. What I'm concerned about is that the young woman who appeared on 60 Minutes had a really terrific outcome. She might have had the same outcome from using these drugs, we'll never know. But it's great, she went to Moscow and she had a great outcome. Unfortunately, the hype around that means that a lot of patients are now going there with a lot of different conditions, so it may or may not be relevant. And I think we've had one death and perhaps there'll be more.
Yeah, we had another question.
Oh, sorry.
Is that
Sorry,
still
Gina.
there, that question?
Hi.
A couple of questions. Going back to the slide of the hype, has there been a study in contacting all these people that have had the stem cell treatment with MND and what the outcomes were?
So thank you for your question. So the question is, has there been a study where we've really documented and tracked the experience of people who've had MND who've travelled? The answer is no, because there's no registry. There's no, and we're trying, so that's sort of the basis of our research project, was trying to get a handle on what's happening. But because there's no obligation to share your experience, these clinics are a for-profit business. They don't share with us. We're flying blind. And my experience has been, because I talk to a lot of people in the community in my job, and my experience has been that a lot of people have, I can't say a lot, I know people who have travelled with spinal cord injury, with motor neurone disease, with multiple sclerosis. Some people feel as though they've had benefit, not miraculous improvement, not cure, but they feel empowered for having tried. I've also met people who have not had the experience they wanted and feel deceived and cheated. But I can't put a figure on it. I don't even know how many Australians are travelling. We've interviewed, I think, in our first phase of our study it was 18, and the second phase we're up to about 50, and these are people who've contemplated treatment. I think the other thing I'll just finish off on is that you raise a really good point in that we want to talk about motor neuron disease. I want to understand about motor neuron disease because it's very different to the MS Moscow link, right? But we can't get a handle on it because these clinics treat anyone, so often with the same strategy. So maybe there's something in some of these treatments, but it's being lost. We just won't know. So again, I think it's about doing your research and trying to find out as much as possible. And my feeling is, unless it's part of a clinical trial, it's a step too far. It's experimenting on you in free fall.
You've been focused on the clinical clinics out there.
Mm-hmm.
Have you looked at non-clinical treatments within the stem cells? For example, have you heard of Dr. Christian Dupont from America, Canada?
No.
He's actually looked at botanical evidence in terms of how the body can actually stimulate the bone marrow to release more stem cells.
Okay.
So the thoughts are that if you've got more circulating stem cells, that's your own, it'll go to the areas that need repairing and replacement. So not that he's doing anything with motor neuron. I know he's done with other illnesses and ailments, and he's not professing to cure and whatever, but he has done some trials. I just wanted you to know anything about Christian Dupont.
So I'll just repeat the question again for this recording. So this is a Christian Dupont, and this is the idea that we could use nutrition in a way to stimulate our own body stem cells. So this is a very often mooted area. I don't know if this chap's work myself, but I do know of others. And the idea is that through dietary change, you could perhaps stimulate more, in this case, hematopoietic stem cells, more blood stem cells. I just don't know. I haven't seen strong evidence for that. To some extent, it makes a bit of sense. How we live, how we look after ourselves. In terms of our overall health, stem cells are part of what keeps us healthy. So we know that, if you don't eat enough green leafy vegetables, you run a risk of anemia. So there's a direct effect. But does it make a change in your pathology, like if you've got a condition? I'm not sure. But certainly I think there's always grounds for trying to keep an optimum diet.
What he's actually done, he's extracted plants like from Chinese medicine, seaweed and AFA and those kind of things, and made a concentrated formula. So it's not just taking extra Brussels sprouts or things like that. So it's actually it's botanical but concentrated formula. I've got some information.
That sounds interesting. No, I haven't heard of that before, but thank you.
I'm focusing on the clinical information, but there is non-clinical stuff out there.
Right, thank you.
We've run out of time. Is that a quickish question?
I just wanted to, it's all right, it's okay. Okay, sorry. Just with regards to that, taking stem cells out, putting it back in, doing the chemo, putting it back in. My dad has just had bone marrow cancer.
Yep.
And that was the strategy they used for him. And he only gets like an extra 5 to 8 years life expectancy because of that treatment, and then I think they put back in some more of the stem cells and he gets an extra half-life or something. Wouldn't that be the same with this Russia thing?
How long? What, is it a true replacement?
Yeah.
What's the long-term effect? And again, we don't know. So there are a lot of clinical trials that are happening in the MS space that are trying to track this long-term.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the big things is in this area is if we are able to find out how to keep those stem cells healthy, then you do have a long-term result. But I think again we're just trying at the moment. We don't have the answers.
Okay, we need to finish up. It's one. No, sorry. We've got two people. We are going to need to finish off, but yeah, just a new
Doctor, you're going to say something about ethics, but
yes.
you didn't get a chance to say.
So
what are the ethics of stem cells?
So thank you for the question on ethics. So I think, in a nutshell, I think there's always ethical issues. Whenever we use human material, whenever we put cells back into a person, when we treat a person, there are always ethical issues. There's no doubt that the use of human embryos challenges a lot of people. I'm sure there's no doubt that the use of fetal tissue would challenge some people. But I think that's fine. I think we can talk about that and we can opt in or opt out. In Australia, we have a very permissive regulatory environment that doesn't restrict scientists from doing what sometimes is called controversial stem cell science, but it makes us tell you why, tell the community why. So we have to apply for ethics approval through institutional ethics committee. If we want to use human embryos, we have to apply for a special national licence. And to me, that's the right balance. So we don't just do stuff because we can. You know, we were talking before about genetic modification. That's the other thing I was going to answer to your question around introns and extrons and junk DNA. We're developing new technology that means you can scan a piece of DNA, identify the damaged gene, cut it out, replace it, or overexpress it. So that technology, it's still not quite there. It's still not quite the science fiction promise, but it's getting there. And of course that is fantastic because it means we might be able to help people with cystic fibrosis. But it also means that we might be able to start enhancing our athletes or our soldiers. And should we? So, you know, with technology, there's always a flip side. So I think there's always ethical issues. And thank you very much for the question.